Hey everybody, welcome to a new episode of Walk in Faith. I'm excited to be sitting down with Andrew Boodhoo Kightlinger. Hopefully I didn't screw it up too much. But Andrew, thank you. I always practice pronunciation of names because I have a challenging last name. But Andrew, I just want to tell you something. I watch a lot of films and I'm watching this film the other day, and within 20, 30 minutes, I'm hysterical crying. I'm not even kidding. Like
Oh wow.
hysterical crying. And my wife's upstairs and I stop and then I'm crying again. And I tell my son about it, and he's like, and he's only 8. I'm like, Mario, I couldn't stop weeping. And he's like, well, was the film sad? I said, no, it had a happy ending. And I don't know what you did. I mean, all I know is, first of all, you should do a product placement with Kleenex tissues because I could not stop crying, Andrew. But it was an amazing film. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. I hate to say that that was the goal of the movie, but it kind of was. I wanted to make something that was hopeful and cathartic and life affirming.
Wow. Well, you definitely did
Yeah.
that. I mean, in case there are a few people out there that are not familiar with the film Lost in the Mountain in Maine, which, by the way, I don't think I've ever been to Maine, but what a beautiful landscape. If you could tell us a little bit about the film and how you got involved.
Yeah. Well, so the film itself, it's a true story, an unbelievable one, and it's set in 1939, and it's about a 12-year-old boy that gets lost in northern Maine in this vast wilderness landscape, over 100,000 acres of wilderness. And he survives over 100 miles over 10 days. And there was something about the story to me, other than it being true, that felt very simple and necessary for the times that we live in. The themes of family and hope and faith and community, I think, are things we need to be reminded of. Movies are often very cynical nowadays. So for me, that was the entry point for it. Obviously, Sylvester Stallone producing it also helped. That was very enticing to me. And that definitely helped me sign on to it. But for me, I saw an opportunity to make a movie that I don't think we see that much anymore and that I think we need. And that's kind of how I came at it.
Wow, that's exactly right. I was actually taking notes immediately. And first of all, the level of detail in the film, like those radio broadcasts added so much to the film because even when it was about World War II or unemployment, which I think 1935 is when unemployment was actually started by FDR, but by I think the film was 1939. So
Yep.
when I put myself in that position when he came home and just the level of detail in terms of the way the family dynamic was, the love, the affection, the way the respect that they had towards the father, eating together as a family, all of those minor details is exactly to your point, is what's lost in society. But the film and the sacrifice that he made throughout the film in terms of his career choice, which probably wasn't even a choice, but he was in a situation like a lot of us are currently. But it made me reflect. There were so many parts of the film that I reflected on. I just started, I had to stop and just do so much research and just because it was a piece of art. It was artwork. But you're right. I mean,
Thank you.
it really took us back to where films were made, especially the family dynamic, where there was this love and respect and sort of admiration for our parents when we watch films now, especially some of the Hollywood films that come out where you don't see that at all. You don't see that at all.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. I made it. Of course, I agree. But it was all very intentional. The father-son aspect of the movie really spoke to me. I have a great relationship with my dad, so I'm very blessed about that. But there was something about this movie ultimately is about a boy who just wants a hug from his dad. That's what he wants. And I think parenting is not a black or white game. There's a lot of nuance to it. And the dad is doing the best he can. He doesn't know that yet. His wife actually says that, right? She says, we're doing the best we can. And I just wanted to remind people that in the end, when things are tough, we also live in very kind of crazy times right now. We have an election coming up. There's a lot of noise in the world. We have wars overseas, all this stuff. That in the end, we have to go back to the source, and we have to go back to family, and we have to go back home. That's where the heart is. And I thought it was just imperative that I make a movie that reminds us that that family is a balm, and that believing in your family and believing in something higher than yourself can make you do incredible things.
That's great. That one scene really got me too, where he's in the wilderness and he started to sort of just recite to himself really about how his dad would read him these bedtime stories, right? And he would make believe he
Yeah,
would sleep. And I guess that's really what got me because I was thinking about my own son and my dad and my relation with my father and my dad he passed away last year, but he
I'm very sorry.
thank you. But he didn't always express the love and affection because, he was a first generation immigrant. So he came from Italy and they didn't really have much and he had a big family. So showing love and affection was not something, first of all, in society at the time was really not accepted. It wasn't something we would do. Like I remember him saying to me, I don't need to say it, I show it. But now it's reversed where I'm overcompensating and telling my son constantly how much I love and how much I care about him. And he's probably going to resent me for that when he gets older too and says, you made me into a snowflake or whatever the word is, right? But we're doing the best we can with what we have. But
Yeah,
what's interesting too, when I was just looking at the way the father dynamic was, and I started to think about, like you said, the source and Abba, and a lot of times too, like for two parts. One is not all of us were raised in this family unit. Like you said, you have a great relationship with your father. So sometimes we know they're in relationships or situations where they don't truly have that belief in God or Abba, and they don't know how to express the love and affection they have. But then also too, when I'm looking back, even my father, and I think as a father now, I look back at my dad and then sometimes I would judge him and say, well, why did he do that? Or how did that happen? But when I look at it from the lens of maybe today versus the situation he was in, it's completely different. So I think we can't judge our parents. We have to understand that they did the best they had, or the best they could with
yeah.
what they had. And that film really brought out so many points. Very, I mean, really, a well done film.
I'm glad you connected to it that way because that was definitely the intention. Is I grew up a missionary kid, so I grew up in the sphere of faith my entire life. My parents are Lutheran missionaries in Africa in Madagascar, and I went to this private Lutheran college and was in a choir and all these things. So faith has been a big part of it, and I think that that the relationship with our parents, you're right. Today, there's a lot of like, oh, think about your trauma and think about, how your parents affected you now that you're an adult and all that stuff. But in the end, like we, you know, we can't blame them for everything, and we have to just like march forward. And I think this movie kind of touches on that in a way. We choose the path forward, and I choose to have a good relationship with my father, or we choose to have good relationships. I think it's all a choice in the end. So I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying, but
Oh, no,
that's definitely, yeah. And then that scene where he kind of reveals the memories of his father reading the book. He's talking to God there, right? I don't want to reveal too much, but that's what he's doing in the end. And I think sometimes we need more of that.
no, I agree. And it was subtle. I mean, I make faith-based films and content all the time, but most of my films are like in your face, Jesus, in your face, Jesus. But the film it was subtle. Like I'm saying, I review films all the time, and most of the time they're good, inspirational films. But I've never walked away with a film where I reflected on it so much. And you can see it from two different perspectives. Like I can look at it as, your father, you still have a good relationship with your dad, so it's a different type of relationship versus when I look back now and I reflect a lot on my father and I'm always thinking about like some of the choices or situations, circumstances he was in, but I never really thought about why he was in those situations or how he got to that situation. I only looked at it from sort of that point, right? Never like prior to that, like why he was like that. And maybe his parents, had some sort of effect on him and the way he was brought up. It's just so much easier to just sort of I don't want to say put blame, but to come up with these solutions opposed to really digging deep and say, well, there's a reason why he's like that. But the film really made me think about that. And I think also too, what we need to do is sort of break this cycle. If we didn't have these great relationships, or maybe our fathers weren't there for us, we could break that cycle. We don't need to continue that cycle when we go to, we have our own families or when we get married, we have our own children. But really, there was so many really great points. Did you get a chance to watch this film with your father?
Oh yeah, he's seen it a couple times now, and he definitely has sparked to it. He can sense that I made it for him and us in our relationship, and this idea of, again, it's about a father and a son who just can't quite say that they love each other, right? They just can't quite get there. And in the end, I didn't really think about this till I was just listening to you talk. in the end, it is about forgiveness in a way. It's about the two forgiving each other and embracing each other. I think that that's, that's just kind of how I grew up. That's how I was raised. So I think inherently all that stuff is in the movie. And you mentioned like the subtlety of the faith aspects. I think that also comes from me being a kid that grew up in Africa. Even though we were Christian missionaries, we were surrounded by Islam and animism and all these things. But I saw how faith and humanitarianism transcended belief. And that's kind of my goal with the movies. I want to make a movie about belief that is for everybody and it
Mhm.
can be universal and you can come away from it and kind of just really pontificate about, what, you know, what do I believe and how do I believe it and what is my relationship with my parents? And ultimately, maybe if you haven't talked to your parents in a while, give them a call. That's kind of my goal. There was a dad recently who saw the film in Maine. We screened it in Maine, and he came up to me and he said, when the credits rolled, I had to get out of the theater and I called my son right away and told him I loved him. And I was like, that is why I made this movie.
Wow. Wow. And you don't even need, and like it's the call to action, but you don't even need to say anything at all. What did your father say to
Mhm.
you after he saw the film the first time?
My father is a man. We have a great relationship, but he's a very sort of, he's a scientist. He's a microbiologist,
Oh,
right? So he's a very like, and I'm an artist. So I'm emotional by trade. I'm an
yeah.
artist. But he said he was proud of me, and that means a lot. And like you said, he shows up. He flew to Maine. He's been all over the place, and he's been telling everybody to see it. And I think he likes that I made a movie with no swear words. That's always positive too. Yeah, goes to this is a movie for everybody, and I think he loves that.
No, I love that. And too, as a missionary too, especially when, for me, I've been fortunate and blessed to travel a lot. And when you see your own faith, like I'm Catholic, work in the church, but when I see my faith locally, it's very different from when I travel and I go to, we were just in Italy 2 weeks ago, or, Greece or whatever country we're traveling to, and or even throughout the country, and you see how, it's very different. I think you need that lens. And I've been blessed to take my son, who's 8 years old, traveling around the world just to see these different parts of the country or different parts of the world, to see how our faith sort of transcends, but also is very different and unique in these different
Mhm.
places, and how people, how they pray and how they worship. Because it's difficult if you just have sort of this one perspective, this very narrow mind. But you growing up as a missionary in Madagascar, and one thing too, if you could come to my house next week, I'm cleaning my basement out. I got a bunch of VHS tapes if you'd like to help me deliver them around. I know that was one of your jobs, right, in Madagascar.
It was, yeah, yeah. That's great. Oh, you heard that story? Yeah, I mean
I, I
that's how
read
I
I read
learned
the
learned
story.
about
Yes,
movies.
I read the
Yeah,
story.
yeah, that's how I learned about movies and what movies were, and that's what
Tell,
got me to where I am now. Yeah.
tell me quickly about that, because I saw that, I think it was on your website, or was it somewhere I read it, but tell me about that because that was interesting.
Yeah, so there was Madagascar is always, I say, 20 years behind the rest of the world. It's still one of the top 10 poorest countries. So the infrastructure is terrible. So if you want to drive anywhere, even 100 miles, it can take days. I remember going on trips with my dad to deliver medicine and supplies to villages, 7 days, and you've maybe driven 200 miles. So there was this Foot Locker full of VHS tapes that were, the Goonies, Black Stallion, Gremlins, the list goes on Golden Pond, probably some movies that probably shouldn't have been watching at that young, Terminator or something. And they would travel in this footlocker and they would go from missionary to missionary family on these arduous journeys, and they would stay there with the family, and we'd burn through them and watch them all, and then you pack them up, and the footlocker would make that journey again, and then eventually end up with another family. And that's where I saw E.T. for the first time. And this movie is kind of a throwback, kind of. It is a throwback to movies that PG rated live action family adventure. We don't see those in theaters all that often anymore. And that's what really like other than the family and faith aspects and community aspects, that was something I wanted was to make a movie for your kid. Like I always say, like I tried to keep, even though the kid's 12 in this, I kind of what was 8-year-old and 10-year-old Andrew wanted to watch at that age, and it was this movie.
Mm.
So take your kid to the theater to see it because that's why I made it, is for boys like him.
No, that's a great point, because there are times when I'm reviewing films and they'll walk in and say, "Why are you watching this?" but to be able to sit down with him and to enjoy a film, and like I said, I started to tell him about it in detail, and he's like, I don't know why you were crying. And I said, well, I couldn't really, he didn't get it because he was only 8, but he'll sort of see that other point of just that the just the strength and the fear, even though the main character had fear and he overcame such adversity, but he was able to overcome it. And I had to think about that myself. I'm like, at 43 years old, would I be able to overcome that for 9 days? Is my faith, is my, what, am I strong enough? And I was thinking too, I'm like, if you, Andrew, were ever put in that situation, what would you lean on in order to sort of overcome the adversity, the just the 9 days in Maine? What would you lean on?
I would lean on the memory of my family. That's what I would do. I would lean on getting to play dominoes with my grandmother again in her hometown in central South Dakota. That's what I would lean on, and that's the thing that would just keep me going, you know. And yeah, yeah. There's a lot of other things, but that's like the thing I think I would think of and go, I got to get home.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I got to get home. And trust me, I've done that hike a couple times now, and it's not easy. So I couldn't imagine being lost out there.
Oh my God. Well, really, it's an amazing film. So what do you hope the audience walks away with after seeing this film? I don't think it's just going to be one thing. I think it's going to be sort of a lasting sort of effect. But what do you think it is, or what do you hope it is?
I kind of alluded to it earlier. I made this movie. Everything I made, I think art always needs a big why behind it. I can't just pour my soul into something without giving it a why. And the why for this is I want to bring people together. I want I want parents to call their children and tell them they love them. I want children to call their parents and tell them they love them. That is the goal for me. That is the goal. And I can already kind of hear that happening from anecdotal evidence. And so that makes me really happy.
I love that. And also too, for parents that, maybe, or like for instance, my father has passed, but also to forgive them, to really forgive them, and to really just reflect on, like we said earlier, they did the best they could with what they had, and to really sort of look back at from the lens of not today, but from maybe what they were going through, and the difficulties and the trials and the tribulation that they had to overcome, opposed to just sort of labeling them. But really, Andrew, this just really a fantastic film, and I look forward to
Thank you.
watching more of your films. And now, how can
Thank you.
people? Oh, my pleasure. How could people find out more about the film, or find out more about your website, or you could
I
share?
mean, I mean, it's going to be in theaters everywhere on Friday, November 1st. So it's coming right up, a couple days away. And you could Google the movie. There's the website, there's an Instagram, there's a Facebook page that's very active. I'm on Instagram at andrew.vhs. You can find me there. So give us a follow, but just Google the film. It's going to be playing at AMC's and multiplexes across the country and your mom and pop theaters as well. So just find a showtime and check it out because it's made for the theater.
Well, I advise everyone to see the film. And one last thing, Andrew, there was a note here. It said something about your audition, that you did something. What was that
Well,
about?
yeah, well, I mentioned how I've climbed the mountain a few times. Part of the interview process for this movie is that, you do kind of the corporate stages where you're meeting all the people. But the final interview was I was flown out to northern Maine and I had to climb the mountain. That was my final test. And the mountain is known, Mount Katahdin is known as the hardest non-technical day hike in America. So it is straight up, no switchbacks. It's like doing the stair stepper for 6 hours up. And and that was it. And I got my deal memo a few days after that hike.
Oh my
And luckily, I had the endurance. I'm a long distance runner, so my legs were kind of broken in already, but it was tough. And we also filmed on that mountain for the movie as well. So the movie has actual footage of a camera crew going up in a storm to film that footage as well.
This must have been Sylvester Stallone's idea, right? Because it reminds me of when he was running up the steps, and was it Rocky 4 or 3? That's sort of like the same thing. You should have. Was it Sylvester that actually told you to do that, or was somebody else? Was this
Uh,
process?
no, but I will say like the pressure, obviously working for him was a dream come true because I'm a huge fan and he's an icon. And I did feel the pressure of like, wow, I better bring my A game and I better be physical on this thing. So I think they were looking for a director that was willing to get in the mud and roll around. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, Sylvester's the OG underdog. He's Rocky, right? Um, and this movie is an underdog movie about a kid. So I think we're carrying his torch for him a little bit. He's still carrying the torch too, don't get me wrong. But yeah, he's a
Well,
great guy.
well, Andrew, thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing the film again. And like I said, I advise people to go to the theaters and support Andrew's films and look up his website because it's extremely interesting. Andrew, thanks again for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Walk in Faith. Always remember you have the ability to inspire and evangelize through your words and actions. God bless you.